Welcome back to Highest You, the podcast where leadership meets soul. In this conversation, we explore the inner world of leadership in a time of seismic change. My guest is Alice Law, a stress mastery and resilience expert, Sunday Times bestselling author, international speaker, Reiki master, and co-founder of Unstressable. Along with Mo Gawdat, she wrote the book of the same name, Unstressable, which became a Sunday Times and Amazon #1 bestseller. After experiencing an extended period of chronic stress and loss herself, Alice trained in multiple techniques and now empowers leaders and organizations to not only manage stress, but to prevent it, unlocking their greatest potential and fostering peak performance. Alice is on a mission to take 1 million people out of stress through championing a human-centered, performance-smart approach to leadership, seeing stress not as the enemy, but as a vital signal. She's advocating for regulated resilience so leaders can remain present, ethical, and creative under pressure, and calling for organizational systems that genuinely sustain people rather than outsourcing resilience to the individual. In this conversation, you can expect depth over platitudes, practical frameworks that you can immediately use in everyday micro practices, and a conversation about leading with authenticity in a world where trust is fragile and change is accelerating. And welcome, Alice.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Lovely to have you. So I want to open this conversation by talking about you, behind the author and the keynote speaker titles. Who are you at your best, at your highest you, and how does that show up?
Oh, my highest me. I think for me, it's like showing up in joy, as much as that sounds, like in present joy. I think I try to, I think so much even in the work I do or life, everyone's always looking for the next thing. Everyone's busy, everyone's looking around. And I have to try and remind myself, like in my highest you, I am just really in awe of everyday moments with people I love and moments I get to do, like whether it's through work or whether it's even just like, the fact that I'm now living in a city where I can get to go and look at the sunset that's huge every single evening or, sit on a beach for a second. It's just trying to be as joyfully present in each moment and really appreciate all those things that just happen in day-to-day life with the people I love.
That's the most beautiful answer. I love it. And it's one of my great joys of living in the Middle East as well. The Arabian sunsets are just fantastic.
They're insane, aren't they? Yeah. They're incredible.
Yeah. And coming into presence, as you say, and awe with that is a wonderful thing. I have a habit now of stopping work every day at sunset and going outside and making sure that I see it. My day's not complete unless I've seen the sunset,
I love that. No, that's true. It's like making those things important because it is. It's just, I used to dream of a sunset like that in grey London.
About it, yeah. Absolutely. I have friends messaging me from London right now going, another 40 days of rain. Exactly. It's like, oh. So you're really well known for Unstressable and for teaching leaders how to deal with stress. So I'm interested in talking to you about what stress is for you. And you say that you see stress as a signal rather than the enemy. And I wonder what shifted your perspective on stress and how can leaders learn to listen to that signal before it becomes a crisis moment?
Yeah. So, I mean, my perspective on stress, I think in life, I was really trying to be shown by life how calm life could be and then how stressful it could be. So I could really understand what those two differences were to then be able to go and really, do all this work. But I got, really had my perspective shifted from seeing my dad so severely stressed. And we had in our family, I experienced stress from every single aspect of my life, continually one thing after the other, loss in every aspect, financially, physically, my own health from stress, my dad mentally first through stress, and the loss of my wonderful sister who he lost to cancer, and then physically himself from a burst stomach ulcer that accumulated from severe stress over several years. And, I was made redundant and I had a breakup at the time, and cheated on me after my sister. There was just so many different aspects. I was like, right, every single angle of my life is in outward stress that I couldn't control, essentially, from these big life-changing things. And so at that point, I was really like, okay, well, stress is, I saw how damaging it was to my dad in those 5 years, 6 years leading up to his, physical death, because he became so, well, first of all, miserable in grief and stress, but so unpresent, so drained. You could just tell he was, growing up, my dad was the most charismatic, wonderful human ever. I was so blessed to have him as dad. And he was just taken over, he wasn't himself at all. And for me, I was waking up so anxious every day, worrying about what was next, what's happened. I was so stressed, not myself, not present. And I think that whole experience of seeing not only how much it affected me, but how much it affected my dad, how much it affected a family, that was my original, okay, well, that needs to, how do we see stress as more of an actual thing that can cause real issues? And so that's when I started to really dive into it all. And I was like, I need to understand this from not just what we're being told in biology, that textbook, okay, well, this is your fight and flight response, but like every aspect, I wanted to see how it worked mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. And that's really where it came to like understanding stress as a signal, like you say, and using it to make ourselves better rather than letting it kind of damage us.
Yeah. And so when we recognize that we've got this signal, what do you recommend that people do with that to sort of catch it?
Yeah, so for us, for me, it's always been about the 4 parts of the self, right? Mind, heart, body, and soul. And my work with Mo and Unstressable, writing that book, was actually showing how once you understand essentially your own data of stress from the signals that your natural self is giving you all the time in your mind, in your heart, in your body, in your intuition, then you can deal with it really effectively. So we look at like, okay, if this is the model of showing you where your stress is coming from, inwardly and outwardly, in what we call a ton of stress, which is like trauma, obsessions, noise, nuisances, and that's the, the micro and macro, internal and external, you can then limit the needless stress in our lives that's causing this background level of chronic stress from just being in the modern world. So there's buildup of micro stress, which is like, the aggressive factory setting alarm, it's the multiple WhatsApp notifications, it's the meeting that annoyed you that day, it's the news headlines 17 times a day. All those things, they don't cause, that's not a huge amount of stress in itself, one alone, but together they make an army. And that background stress is then that base that everyone has for all the other uncontrollable stress that we really have ourselves and that we create in our minds. So I always say like limit the needless stress first. So it's like noticing what micro stress you can cut out and bring your baseline down, and then you can start to listen to the signals. So you can notice each part of us really speaks in a different way when it comes to stress. I can go through them if you like, but it's like those 4 languages.
Let's bring it live. So I'll share with you the signal that I have, and maybe you can help me kind of understand that and think about that. So I have a stress response in my stomach. It's like a sort of, it's a tightness in my solar plexus. And I often have that, and when I notice it, I try and pay attention to it. When I notice it, I try and relax and breathe into it. But that's all I do with it, really, so I don't kind of, I don't do anything else with that, really. I breathe. And that often works. But, what would you, if I present that to you, what would you say? How would you suggest I deal with that?
Well, so for me, that's emotional that's turned physical. So it's, the emotional physical link is so strong, particularly in the stomach with stress as well, because we know when our fight and flight goes off, actually our digestion gets shut down because our body's so wise that it thinks it's about to be eaten by a tiger from stress. It says, why do I need to digest a steak when I'm about to become a steak myself? So it starts to shut down things it needs, for you to thrive and basically go into survival mode. But the link between the emotional to the physical, it's always really interesting actually looking at, okay, well, that's that link of, okay, my emotional stress is actually showing up as a physical discomfort in my stomach. So for that, I always say doing things actually like, okay, breathing, but with visualization. So to actually, we can move an emotion through us through what I call like shape shifting, as crazy as that, might sound to people, but it's essentially giving the emotion an actual physical, vision in your head. So I would say to a client, okay, if that's a continual thing that's coming up, first of all, you want to put yourself into parasympathetic state by changing your state. So doing something like a physiological sigh, breathing deeply in through the nose and then hold, and then another sharp inhale at the top and then sighing out of the mouth. That's proven by people like Andrew Huberman, who I love, to be the most effective, quick stress reset through the breath to put you back into parasympathetic state. So changing your physical state first, and then doing a visualization when you're actually calmer to basically say, okay, if you closed your eyes and that was where you're feeling it. So it's like, okay, breathing deeply, where do I actually feel this tension in my body? Place a hand over that area. Close your eyes, and then with your awareness where your hand is rather than in your mind. So it's like bringing that awareness down from the head and into the part of the body where that stress is held. Asking it, because I would say that's emotional to physical. If this was an emotion, what emotion would it be? And so first of all, naming that emotion, and then saying to yourself, okay, what shape would it be? And giving it an actual physical, experience, like what shape, what texture, what color, and you have it in your head. And then once you've got that, you can then visualize, imagine breathing that shape out of your system, either like out through the stomach, if that's where it was for you. With every exhale, just really imagine pushing it out, or out through your toes if you like moving it up, whichever way. But it's about, physically moving it as well through the mind.
Fascinating. Yeah, I haven't really had that dialogue with it. It's only recently that I've become present to it as a signal of stress or anxiety. I always just thought I had digestive issues, and I never made the equation between sort of the emotional response and the physical response. So I spent a long time managing my digestive issues, and it's only in the last few years when I've done more work around embodiment that I've actually gone, oh, okay. I come from a long line of people with really stressful stomachs, who carry their stress in their tummy. My mum, my grandma, all of it was sort of, and it's me too.
I will actually say as well, before you even need to release it, it's asking it why it's even there.
Right.
The emotion itself. We can talk to each part of us, like a third party. So, you can direct your brain, tell it what to do, what thought you want it to bring you. Same with an emotion, you can say, once you found it in that place, okay, if it's anxiety, what are you here to show me? So I always say an uncomfortable emotion is only ever trying to show you one of two things. It's trying to show you an action outside of yourself that you need to take action on, or something within yourself that you need to process and feel and heal. So once you know which one it's trying to show you, then it'll dissipate, because you can either take the action or say do the breathing of the visualization to release it.
Yes. See, that makes sense to me, because the way I think about emotions, and I don't know if this tallies at all, is that emotions that are or a signal that tell us how near or far we are from our highest self, right? So when we're in alignment with our highest self, it's that, the emotions tend to be positive. When we go a little bit out, we tend to start to experience emotions that are more difficult. And so, I often wonder, I like to inquire some more, I suppose, into my own anxiety and where I'm off from my highest self, because I know that when I'm in flow, I don't experience that. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's such a misconception, I think, in the modern world, that if someone has an uncomfortable feeling, that it's like, well, that shouldn't be there, so let's just push it away. When actually an uncomfortable feeling is a huge gift, because it is a signal. It shows you, okay, if I'm feeling fearful about something, it's showing you something more in depth about yourself. There's this incredible, the most recent research about emotions was done by Professor Brené Brown from Stanford, and who I love. And, her team and her found that there's there's 87 emotions and emotional experiences now, but the average human can only name 3 within themselves: happy, angry, sad. And when you know the nuances of like the intricacy of our emotions, they become a real guide. So she would say, for example, you have jealousy and envy. Jealousy is an experience with 3 people, envy is an experience with 2, but envy itself is a guide because it shows in darker or light shades. So the lighter side of envy is, Kate's on holiday, and I see Kate on holiday and I think, oh, I'd love to have a holiday, but Kate deserves a holiday. That's the light side of envy. It shows you something you might need to do for yourself, right? Whereas the darker side is Kate's on holiday. I don't think Kate deserves to be on holiday, and I want a holiday, right? That's the darker side.
Doesn't deserve to be on holiday again. Almost certainly not.
But that's the darker side, you see, and that instead would show you, okay, this is something I need to work on within me, because, you know, of course, everyone deserves whatever they'd like to do, right? So it's when you can use your emotions as the signal that's even an intelligence, it's so powerful.
It's so eloquently elaborated. I love that, because I see the emotions as the sort of the flashing lights on the dashboard, you know, that we can navigate by. And Brené Brown, I think her Atlas of the Heart, I think, is one of the best books I've ever read.
So
I remember
good.
sitting down to it and going, wow, this is a real eye-opener, because we're not necessarily born kind of understanding how to navigate or how to name emotions, first of all, let alone navigate them. Right. And, you know, I mean, I grew up in the 1970s, and people, you know, didn't do emotions. Didn't do emotions. And so, you know, reached adulthood without being able to name probably any of them. In fact, my question was, do I have emotions? I'm not. I remember going to university and saying to a friend who was talking about her emotions, saying, I'm not sure I have emotions. It's been a long journey to here, I can tell you.
But that's the truth, right? I think in any aspect, none of us, when we talk about, like, for example, when I say stress is a signal, it's a signal no one was taught. And the same with the thoughts in your head, the same with your emotions, same with the physical niggles or even your intuition. I definitely didn't grow up anyone around me being like, you're not your thoughts and you can direct them, or this is what that emotion is, or, you know, have you checked in with your body, or do you know what your intuition is? And there's this incredible system that we were all given, but we basically didn't get told how to use it. And I think people are only now just starting to realize what we're actually capable of, and that's how you can use it as an advantage.
Yeah, amazing. I agree with you. Yes, there's lots that we can tune into here. And interesting, kind of bringing it back into the corporate context, which is what I talk about. You know, I think emotions are still seen as a bit of a dirty word. You know, people show emotion at work. It's, you know, considered to often to be a misstep.
Yeah, I think it's kind of getting into the right, starting to glide into the right space. Actually, weirdly, I think because of AI in a wonderful way. But which I'll explain why I think that in a second. But I think it's the emotional side of work, first of all, was equated with it. It's like, okay, we've been taught how to think and not how to feel. You go out, you do, you think, that will get you success. And then emotions were seen as something that could be, because people didn't know how to process them or even control them. It's like, oh, they're overly emotional, and that's not acceptable. Okay, so which obviously we don't want people screaming in an office or, you know, breaking down in those moments. But the other side of emotions, that emotional intelligence, which obviously a lot of companies are now starting to realize the benefit of, is that the greatest leaders in the world are the most emotionally intelligent, who can read everyone in a room and then be able to actually navigate how to manage those people, whether it's a client or whether it's your team. And if you're only thinking in your head, that's not going to get you very far. And with the age of intelligence that's coming, obviously, with AI, now those skills are going to be greater than ever, because, you know, if we outsource intelligence to something more intelligent than us, the only thing it won't be able to replicate is intuitive and emotional intelligence.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, there's potentially something gendered here, because, you know, the emotional side and intuition, all of those things have traditionally been more associated with women than men. And I wonder, you know, whether men have sort of steered away from, you know, being seen to be emotional at work. And I really like your reframing of what that does for you, because, you know, actually being able to navigate emotions and read people gives you a range that is really helpful when, you know, leadership essentially is about how you deal with people.
Yes,
exactly. People are full of emotions, and so if you can't read emotions, if you can't manage your own emotions, if you can't navigate those sorts of things with a bit of skill and intuition, then
100%. It's like, that's that phrase of, you know, I always say to people, it's like, you can get into disagreements with, say, your partner or someone at work, and then they'll come home and they'll say, well, they don't understand how I feel. I'm like, well, maybe, but do you understand how you feel? You know, is what you're saying actually what you're feeling? Like, are you attaching the right word to the right feeling? And it's just, again, it's like relearning that as a skill, as your own language that's an intelligence, really.
So let's talk about regulated resilience, because it's something I think you talk about in your work. What does a regulated leader look like in practice? And, you know, how does that state impact the people around them, the team, the organization?
Yeah, so I call it regulated resilience because I truly believe that, you know, first of all, being in a regulated state allows you to go from high stress to calm, in and out in effortless flow, rather than getting stuck. when we're unregulated, we can get stuck in a state of stress. We can find it very hard to essentially shift gear and go back into calm, whether that's emotionally or mentally or physically. And so regulated resilience, as I call it, because I think the old term of resilience is so outdated now, that push through, toughen up, keep going, until that's how we saw it, as this overly masculine sense of like, that's what it means to be resilient. Right. And that eventually causes a breakdown in the end. That's when people are having, burnout later, or that's when they're having a breakdown years and years later. They're like, I've just been carrying on. So that resilience side, I think, is finally moving away to the fact that that's not true resilience. For me, true resilience, which is that kind of regulated resilience, is being able to know, okay, when to push, when to pause, when to regulate, when to kind of basically be very, very agile and flexible with your own system and move in and out of stress back to calm as and when you need for performance versus, burning out. And so, that being a regulated leader is, oh God, it has such an effect, because it's, we know now from studies, stress is contagious, but you can feel it anyway energetically, right? If you go into a room at work, if you go into a meeting, or if you go home and your partner's stressed, people will feel on edge. It's the same way if you've been on a phone call even with someone and they were really like, you got to come off the call being like, oh my God. And we feel it energetically anyway, emotionally. But now we actually know from studies that stress is biologically contagious, because when you are in a state of ongoing chronic stress and your stress hormone cortisol is constantly seeping through your skin, that actually automatically sets the stress responses off of those people you're spending the most time around you.
Wow.
Because it was a survival mechanism. Wow. Because in tribal times, if someone was stressed, it was because there was an actual threat there. So they needed the whole, tribe to be alert. So it's kind of, we're wired for that. So you are, as a leader, for example, as CEO, if you are a stressed CEO of a company, I'm afraid that is filtering down in through all the layers, and then it filters. So I see that as like stress being, that ripple. So it's like you have to think of it, if you are someone who is that calm, regulated leader, you are giving your team the best chance to be the best versions of themselves in terms of performing, in terms of being able to solve problems, in terms of, being able to see from a wider perspective, because you will be able to, first of all, when you're regulated, when you're dysregulated, actually, what people don't realize is that they might be like, I perform so much better under stress. No, you think you do. Short term, yes, I don't argue with that. Not all stress is bad. Like you can have what we call eustress, which is that, stress goes on, comes off. It's like when you're about to do a talk on stage, or you're about to run a race, or you need to get out of the way of a moving car. That's when your stress response, or get a deadline in over a short period of time. Yeah. That's when stress is working for you. But most of us aren't living that way. We're in this ongoing simmering stress in the background. Yeah. And whilst we think we're performing at our best, we're actually not. We are up to 31% less productive. And we are essentially working from, when a brain is chronically in stress, the part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, that is meant to be that problem solver, emotional regulator, wider perspective thinking, which is paramount for a leader, goes offline biologically. So whilst you think you're doing the best you can, you're actually not. No,
that's right. The prefrontal cortex is the executive function, the thinking bit, the bit that does the sort of, the important rationalization. Absolutely. And we just go into fight or flight, the amygdala, exactly. Operating from there. No, not great. And we know it intuitively, but it's great to hear, how the data backs it up, and also that, biologically there's something going on that's very interesting. So I think we've all kind of been in situations with leaders who, who clearly are stressed, and we know that the first thing that goes is clarity and perspective and, balance.
All the things you really need. Literally. Yeah. I always think it's like, I always say to people, if you're working in a world of continual stress without regulating yourself, it's genuinely like watching a film in black and white when you could be watching it in color. Yeah. You're really diminishing your capacity and your ability to, like you say, have that clarity, problem solve, really be innovative, and also pass that through your entire company and your team as well. Yeah.
We know that teams perform better with psychological safety. There's loads of research that's been done around that. And I think, it's difficult to feel safe when we're being triggered by other people's stress. Yeah, it just doesn't feel safe, does it?
No, exactly. Because I define stress as a disconnection from safety. That's like because that's biologically what it was. It's your fight and flight response to say threat.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a lack of safety essentially for your system anyway.
Interesting. High alert. So and you started to kind of allude to the period that we're in, and the changes that are coming up. What do you see as the particular challenges of the future that we're facing into now, and how do you think leaders can help their teams to deal with the level of uncertainty that's coming up?
I think one of the greatest challenges you keep seeing over and over again is, companies are accelerating at this huge pace if they are starting to use AI or they're getting results or different things, but they're not giving the people system, which is essentially, you're only as strong as your teams, right? And whilst AI is going to be able to do different things, it's people that are going to be using AI that are going to do the great things. So we're not seeing enough, equipping of teams to be able to manage and be resilient and be less stressed and be able to use all these things without having a nervous breakdown, essentially, from just the amount of hyper overload. It's a bit almost like, when you see a car being sent into a race at 60 miles an hour and it's now being asked to go at 120, but you haven't put more oil in it, you haven't changed the tires, you haven't done anything, and then you're hoping that it doesn't explode at the end. And that's kind of what I see as like one of the biggest issues that's happening. And I think with things like critical thinking, we're already starting to go down studies with people like Dr. Arman, who I love in America, who's one of the leading brain specialists in the world, and he scans people's brains all the time for data to see how they're changing from various things. And he said from people using LLM models like ChatGPT and stuff, critical thinking is already going way down because people aren't using it in a way, they haven't been taught yet in a way that makes them use it to make themselves smarter, just using it to outsource and not think critically at all. So
I was talking to somebody about this, somebody very senior in the advertising world the other day, and he referred to it as a cognitive collapse. And I thought, yeah, actually, I get that.
It is though, isn't it? And that's what I think is really, really scary, because it's, I think the side of skills that people really need, our human skills are, I truly think that in an amazing way, what was once seen as soft skills, emotional intelligence, intuitive intelligence, they're going to be the paramount skills, because, like I briefly touched on at the start, if you're no longer the most intelligent person in the room because something else is, artificial intelligence is, or AGI is, when we eventually get there, probably later this year, then how do you put yourself ahead of other people? How do you put yourself above other leaders? Because they can also outsource and be just as intelligent or more intelligent than you. The only thing that can't replicate yet, and I don't think it will be able to, is that human side of us, which you can already start to see are really craving. From different aspects online, people are getting so sick with information overload and different things. It's like we're really craving community, human side. People want to, if they're, being sold to, they really want to know who's behind that sale. And I think all those human skills, emotional intelligence, intuitive intelligence, they're going to become the most important skills on the planet at some point.
Yeah, I agree with you. And so I'm just sitting here thinking about it, based on our previous conversation about the negative impact of leaders in stress, and thinking, well, AIs don't get stressed. So aren't they going to make fantastic leaders at some point, They're going to be completely chilled, they can adopt, we can program them to be fabulously intuitive and empathetic, and is that not...
I mean, I don't know about the programming. Mo and I have these debates about this, about whether it will be able to do that. But I think I don't think anyone, you're already seeing levels of loneliness increase from people who are using AI as their boyfriend or girlfriend and dating and stuff, because it's not the same experience, when they can, yes, be that planner of the organization and work everything out in a really great way. But still, I think people want this authentic figure to look up to, who can be like, my God, that's a really nice person to follow in this crazy, chaotic period that we're going through. What a beacon of, of motivation and joy, because you're already seeing that now with, so many different aspects around the world where leaders are really letting people down. And I think an authentic leader who's emotionally intelligent is going to be so ahead of everyone else.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before. I think in terms of the sort of trust in institutions and in leaders generally has been declining for many years, and so I guess I'm interested in your perspective on how we can restore that in some way.
Yeah, because I think it's that paramount word, like you say, isn't it? Trust. It's like I think my personal feeling is like you when you really respect and trust a leader is you respect someone who is authentically, first of all, saying and doing what they say, right? So it's like turning up as the person you saw in front of everyone and behind everyone, and actually doing what they say they're going to do. That's all people really want. It's like honesty, transparency, and authenticity in terms of saying, I'm not perfect, but I'm going to help you navigate whatever it is, and we'll get through it together. And I also have, I'm regulated enough in not saying it, but showing it, that I'm not going to be that person that's going to make you panic whilst we're going through different things. I think it is having trust in someone's like humanity as well as their capability, if that makes sense. And that's been really lost a lot at the moment.
So, and I think what I see is that, there's a whole, not top leaders, but maybe middle levels of leaders are actually quite concerned about their jobs at the moment, So I think there's a lot of questions about, is this technology going to replace me? And if people aren't thinking about that, they should be thinking about that, because the speed of acceleration and capability of this tool is phenomenal. And so as we move into a period that's more uncertain, where people potentially feel like they may become irrelevant and they may be replaced, what would you suggest to them in terms of kind of practical tools for managing themselves and becoming this regulated person in an ever more dysregulated world?
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because I do think, and I'm not just saying this because of the work that I believe in and do, I think that you need to prepare now for the uncertainty, so that when whatever happens, because none of us can actually predict this at this point. You've got crazy, tech oligarchs like Sam Altman talking about how, I don't know if this could go wrong. It could be the end of humanity. And you're like, sorry, what? You know what I mean? No one actually knows what's going on. And so it's actually being like, okay, what version of myself do I need to be that when, if anything happens, I can handle it? So it's actually pre-preparing yourself to be able to be regulated, so that when a crisis happens, you're not the one who's literally a rabbit in the headlights, not knowing how to handle yourself. And that, I always say that with stress in general, it's like we for years have waited till people are burnt out, or till breaking point, or the CEO's had a heart attack, and then the company does something about it. It's like, do not wait till that moment now, because it's going to be 100 times worse than everything we've ever seen before, because we haven't predicted this before. We've never dealt with it. So it's like, prepare now to be the most resilient, regulated, calm version of yourself, who from that, you'll be able to deal with anything that comes your way, whatever crisis or whatever joy, you'll be able to deal with either. And so for me, it's about starting to, first of all, manage the mind, and really like regulating that side of mental, because we know that mental stress really starts to be we've actually got data on this. So with Unstressable, we've had, it's like over 30,000 people now have taken our stress quiz, and it shows your overall stress score, and then your score mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually in each quadrant. So you get your primary and secondary. The data across the world, we've done it in over like 120 countries now. And it's all showing the same pattern, which is mental is the primary, but emotional is the driver that keeps the ongoing stress score going. So whilst everyone always panics when they get their physical stress, that's okay. Finally, I can see some stress. I'll do something about it now. The starting point is your mind and emotions. So to start to really look at those two, start to direct your thoughts, start to understand that you aren't your thoughts. And, I say like a simple tool, one of Mo's favorites, which I love, which I've kind of changed slightly, is he would say like, brain, bring me a useful thought. And I say like, use that to whatever you want. It's like, if you want a calming thought, ask it to bring you that. If you want a motivational thought, ask it to bring you that. So it's starting to understand that you can control your thoughts and mind, and you can use your emotions as an intelligence and move them through you as well.
See, that's very interesting, because as human beings, are we not hardwired to spot downsides and, and negativity? I say this about my mother. She's fantastic at the downside measures for spotting the potential problems and highlighting them, especially with regard to me. But I think as human beings, our brains are sort of wired to spot the difficulties, not the isn't it all going well? Isn't it all fantastic? And so as we move into periods which are, no, it feels like ever greater uncertainty. I guess things have always been a little bit uncertain. It's hard to judge whether it's more so now. Yeah. I don't know, but given our sort of natural propensity to spot the things that might go wrong, and focus on those, and then ruminate on those at 3 o'clock in the morning.
That's why we have to get into brain training now, right? I always say to people, it's things like, okay, they sound so, airy fairy. Oh my God, gratitude. What on earth does that do? Gratitude is neural training, right? So we do have negativity bias in our brains. Like you say, our brains are hardwired to look for threats on automatic to keep us safe. So instead, we now know from neuroplasticity, though, we have the power to change our brain to look instead for more of the positive. All that is done through is things like repetition. And when you're doing something like, I say, like go deep and to take gratitude to the next level, I would say to someone, okay, if you're thinking of every single evening, right, what are 5 things that went right today? Also look for 5 things that you can be grateful for in the most stressful part of your day. But okay, what was the worst part of my day? What was the most stressful? Okay, what are all the things I can be grateful for within that? What has it taught me? What has it shown me? What can I be happy about for that person, even if they annoyed me? So it's like training your brain that extra level to be like, no, come on, there's always something that you can look for a problem solve, always something you can be grateful for. And whilst that sounds, on its own, it's not doing time compounding of that. If you do that for a week, if you do it for a month, if you do it for 2 months, you'll notice that your brain is less reactive to stress. It's less, well, that's a problem immediately. It's more like, oh, okay.
Well, you're somebody who's come through some of the most difficult moments. So, thinking about this personally, what were the things that you applied in your situation that you found most effective?
Yeah, I think for me it was really emotional regulation, because it was that mental emotional side. I mean, the emotional regulation because I was so anxious, and so I had a very different experience, for example, with the 2 times of grief, because the first time when I lost my sister, I was in that classic modern world stage, and I was also just left university, all my friends were partying. I didn't want to feel, because I was just so overwhelmed by everything else was still stressfully going on, and I just experienced grief for the first time in my life. And I was so overwhelmed by emotions. I was, right, let's suppress these. I was going out with my friends, partying, just doing whatever I could to just basically not feel. And as I always say to everyone, and I'm first-hand experience of this, emotions don't disappear when we push them away. They just sit under the surface to either turn into a physical ailment, a disease, or to have an explosion in a different format later for a different reason. And when I had a breakup, sort of, I think it was like a year and a half after that, every single part of grief for my sister came up at the same time as the breakup. And it was one of the worst experiences of my life. It was just so many emotions. And so then when my dad died, horrific. But what I did was knowing how to actually process and go into it rather than running away from it. And I can even, without sharing who, saw myself at completely different stages than some of my family members on that, thing. And instead of being this prolonged part of the suffering side, it was just going into the pain as much as possible so that I didn't have to suffer for ages. It's kind of like
that's really
emotional regulation.
Distinction between pain and suffering, and that they're not the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, I see it as pain is what your soul, your body, your heart is asking you to experience. Suffering is what your human side makes you experience. And that's what happens when we push stuff away and it comes back, and we, ruminate about stuff rather than, seeing it clearly, and we go round and round.
Perpetuates this. When my dad died, my mum was offered antidepressants by her doctor, and she said, I'm not depressed, I'm grieving.
Yes, exactly.
And I just salute her for that, because, she went fully into her grief process. She really grieved. She was married for 50 years and they had a beautiful relationship, so it was a gigantic grief. she really, I mean, she did that for about a year, and she really processed that grief. She felt all of it, you know, and at the other end of it, she came out of it, and she rebuilt her life in a way that's really phenomenal. She's a massive contribution to the world and to the people around her, you know. So
yeah, and I think that's amazing, and I think it's such a good point to highlight that this is not, you know, I've got absolutely, you know, nothing against, you know, prescription medication for those that need it at different times, but in those moments, grief, the stages, the experiences, it's natural. You need to let those emotions out. So if your mum had taken, you know, perhaps that antidepressant, she wouldn't have moved through it in the way that she had over the period of time that she had, you know. And I think it's about actually being courageous enough to go into that experience so that you can come out of it quicker, as strange as that sounds, which sounds counterintuitive because we think, let's run away from the emotion when actually we need to go towards it.
yeah. And recognizing that nothing really lasts forever, you know.
100%.
And you know, an emotion like grief can last quite a while. The grieving process can be deep and long. But you know, there are other emotions that we experience that are more fleeting, and yet still kind of don't want to go into. And actually, if you sit with most emotions, they're kind of over in no time at all. I don't know if you've
100%.
got any,
It's like I always say to people, I'm like, have you ever felt the exact same way from the start of your life to this moment? No one can ever raise their hand and say yes. So we're like, well, an emotion is fluid, it will move, but it stays stuck because we resist it, right? So it's like when we start to essentially get curious and welcome it, you know, I have something I call the curiosity structure, which is like, which emotion am I feeling? Where am I feeling this in my body? Why might I be feeling this? And then what can I do about it? So it's like which, where, why, and what, and just actually just being in conversation with your emotion in the same way that we are with our friends, you know, in kind conversation, not push them away, ignore them, and belittle them. That's not
like that friend today.
Exactly. And that's how you have to treat your emotions because they're only there to help you.
Yeah, very interesting. So I think even quite emotionally developed people don't necessarily have a dialogue with their emotion to explore what message it has and what information it holds or what it's bringing to you. I think that's really an interesting perspective.
Yeah, so I really wanted to try and I think that's something I weirdly started doing for myself during these challenging times, like you were saying. And I realized that, okay, the more I can speak to it, the more I can, you know, essentially guide and use it rather than being like swallowed up by it. And once you get into that dialogue, it really can be an amazing, like I said, GPS to know like, okay, do I need to do that or do I need to do this?
So you mentioned earlier about the word resilience, and we you know, we've talked about that before. And you know, it's my belief, I think yours too, that resilience shouldn't be outsourced to the individual to take care of. You know, whatever resilience, actually, the organisations have some duty of care to their people. So let's talk about organisation cultures and, you know, the bigger picture, because we've talked about it from an individual perspective, really. But, you know, creating cultures that have rituals or practices that help people to stay regulated and in a, you know, a high performance rather than a high stress state. What would you say to organisations?
I think it's, yeah, I'm glad you said that, you know, organisational responsibility, because I think, you know, what companies are starting to hopefully realize, or should realize if they aren't yet, is that, you know, studies are now showing that your manager can have as much effect on you as your romantic partner, because that's the amount of influence and time you're spending with the people at work, right? So if you think about that as a huge impact on your life, that impact can either be something that really hinders the people around them and makes them, you know, more stressed and less happy. And we know, like I said, when you're stressed and unhappy, you're actually 31%, up to 31% less productive. Yeah. So as an organization, to create a happy, resilient, high-performing culture, it's really about like that co-regulation and feeling like we're all sense of a part of community, and essentially like an internal culture and movement, right? That doesn't look at stress as something that is a badge of honor, because it's not.
Right.
You know, it doesn't look at emotions, intelligence, you know, regulation, resilience as something that's not needed. It sees it as a priority. It's almost like a KPI. It's like, okay, well, all those things need to be hit for us to perform at our best so that the business can work its best. And the great joy about that is that it all comes back to mean that your people will be the happiest. So I believe it's about instilling things that are part of, like, you know, some of the work we do, and I say is like, yes, we can have these one-off events that inspire and they're amazing at the time, but it's about the actual integration afterwards of kind of continual like interventions in a micro level that allow people to make it a normal part of their day and have that accountability.
Give us some examples of what sorts of interventions or rituals or things that would
Yeah,
help organizations?
So for example, like I when we talk about with Unstressable, it's like we were saying, okay, there's a language that we use that's like, okay, limiting the needless stress. So when we use our model, a ton of stress, and get people every week to be like, okay, Sunday night, I'm going to work out where my stress is coming from last week or Monday, and notice, okay, how many nuisances am I going to get rid of this week? Teams can also do that on different levels. It's like a team leader can be like, right, what are 5 things we're limiting this week, or 3 things we're all limiting? Everyone's doing it together. And then you notice it's like 2 other people in the company. They're like, oh, well, you said you were limiting that this week and you weren't. And it kind of becomes more of a cultural, normal part of the conversation, as well as then, integrating things in. So it's like, okay, well, giving people the autonomy to be able to know, okay, I can do my work and still know that I can take a break for 10 minutes at this point because I feel like I need to calm down and I need to go for a walk, or I need to, go and do some breathing in the loo, or whatever it is. I need to just have a little moment to reset. And I know that I'll perform better and I will still get my work done. It's giving people that autonomy to be able to be like, okay, we support you. If you want to put these things into place, we're not going to be like, why are you away from your desk? What are you doing? Or we're not doing that today, or making it more of like a taboo topic. It's making it more of like a high performance topic. It's almost like, oh, well, if you're not doing that, are you actually, enjoying yourself? Are you actually performing at your best? And making it part of like that ongoing movement of the company, essentially.
I love that this is actually about helping and supporting teams to be high performing.
Yeah. 100%, because the mismatch, I cannot tell you, Kate, and I'm sure you've had this experience with your work. It's like when, people at high level are performing and they think they're at the highest part of their performance, then they start to learn about this sort of stuff and how they can manage their mind, direct their thoughts, regulate their emotions, physically, lower their stress. The shift you can see from even sort of 3-4 sessions, they're suddenly like, oh my God, my capacity has increased by 20%, and you're like, yes, because you're starting to regulate your system and put yourself more online, essentially, which you didn't realize because you haven't had access to that because you've been driving through chronic stress. And that's what you want to give your teams the ability as well. Instead of them kind of rolling along in chronic stress in this sort of whirlwind, thinking that they're doing as much work as they can, you give them the tools to be able to be regulated, make it part of the culture with, interventions and sessions and just tiny micro influences. Then they suddenly have this huge sort of wider perspective. It's like, oh my God, my capacity has increased so much. And I'm also happier. I'm also less tired. What a shock. We were never meant to be in this like frazzled stress spiral.
Yeah, no, agree. Absolutely. It's a wonderful message, and I'm sure there are people listening to this who have responsibility for others in the organization, and therefore should really pay attention to. Are you somebody who is helping your team to to come into regulation, co-regulation? And I think you named it. Leadership of the future really is about being able to be present with humanity, and that requires being online, and you are not online. Exactly. You're actually not online if you're stressed. It takes you offline, right?
Exactly, 100%. Yeah.
So I'd like to finish these conversations with the soul-led invitation, and so this is a chance for you to offer a soul-led invitation to people listening, something that you would encourage them to do that would have an impact.
Yes. So I would encourage people to start to listen to their signals, and start to actually see stress as a signal that you can use to your advantage. So instead of thinking that you have to be stressed to be successful, think instead about how much more successful you could be, not just in your work, but in your life and your relationships and yourself if you weren't stressed, because that is the truth. And that's the kind of change of mindset shift we have to have.
Beautifully said. I love it. I'll buy that. Thank you very much for a lovely conversation, Alice. Very illuminating.
No, thank you for having me. It's been lovely.
Thank you for listening to Highest You. Until next time, stay present and stay connected to your highest self.